Hello, everyone. So I believe it's time, so I'll get started. Thank you for joining this session. Please do introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to. Unfortunately, my colleague Roby Samweli is in Tanzania with poor connectivity and is unable to join. I'm going to share my screen now, so I won't be able to see the chat, but I'll come back to it shortly. So please bear with me. And okay, so my name's Janet Chapman. I'm the chair of Tanzania Development Trust, which is an entirely volunteer-run charity that's been supporting grassroots projects in Tanzania for 45 years. And we have volunteer local representatives in the areas where we work, and Roby Samweli is our representative for Mara region and also the director of Hope for Girls and Women. So our priorities for Tanzania Development Trust are clean water, which is a huge issue in the areas where we work, girls' education, so particularly hostels for girls' secondary schools, so that girls don't have to walk up to 4 hours to and from school, which puts them at huge risk. And also small income generating projects. This is a tailoring project that we funded that you can see here. So I've been involved fairly much full time as a volunteer for the last 9 years, and I've been generally visit twice a year. I was last there about 14 months ago. And in the context of visiting our projects in rural Tanzania, realized that those villages were basically not on any map, which made navigation extremely difficult, but it also affected the work of our partners in Tanzania. So 5.5 years ago, I started Crowd2Map, which is a volunteer-run project which is putting rural Tanzania on the map using OpenStreetMap, which is a open source Wikipedia for maps. And later on in this session, we'll have a chance to get started with that and actually do some mapping if people would like to. So also, our local representative, Roby Samweli, she runs an NGO that particularly campaigns against female genital mutilation. She's an FGM survivor herself, and it's a huge issue in certain areas of Tanzania, particularly where she is, Mara, next to the Kenyan border. So she works with FGM activists, does outreach work, and runs safe houses, particularly during the cutting seasons when girls are particularly subjected to FGM. However, the girls and their parents couldn't easily find the safe houses, and the safe house staff and the police couldn't find them because much of rural Tanzania looked like the map at the top. So there could be 30,000 people living on this map, but they were not shown on OpenStreetMap and they're not shown on Google Maps. So places, more urban areas like Dar es Salaam, the biggest city, has had a huge amount of mapping into OpenStreetMap done as part of a World Bank project. This was particularly around flood resilience because every year it floods, but also around access to healthcare and so on. All right? But rural areas tend, as always, to get left behind. So we started this project to address that, because activists and many people in rural Tanzania need maps for all of the things that we do with maps, as in navigating, planning where resources should go, and also to help rescue girls at risk of FGM, people who've had an accident will need urgent help, and many, many other things. So how this works is it's a two-stage process. So we have a big network of online volunteers, and anyone who has an internet connection can get involved. And they look at satellite images such as this one. So this is showing an area of rural Tanzania, and you can see that there's a road here, which somebody has traced and drawn in, and there's also some roads here. There's a round building here, and some buildings here as well that have been added. So they are tagged as buildings, because in this case, all we know about this is it's a building. We don't know that if it's a school, a clinic, a hospital. If we knew that, then we would add that as well. And there are also 2 buildings here that have not been added. So this mapping is not complete. But then, more importantly, probably, that we're also training people on the ground in rural Tanzania to add their local knowledge. And they're mostly using a free app called Maps.me, which works on Android, which is what people have generally. And we can use it on very, very cheap $30 smartphones, and it works offline. You can also use it in Swahili. And how this works is it uses the phone's GPS, so it detects where you are, and you can navigate to any of these places. But if there's somewhere that's missing, you can also add it to the map, and it goes directly into OpenStreetMap. If you're not online, which is very often the case in these rural villages that have poor connectivity, then it stores all the data on the phone, and once it's once you're back in connectivity, it will upload them. So here you can see some people adding. Here is a water point in this village, and they're just adding that information into Maps.me. And then we've also worked with many small NGOs and also local police to train people how to use the maps to get quickly to the places where they need to go. So, for example, as I said, in the cutting season, the FGM cutting season, which is generally during the long school holidays, Roby and other activists and the police will get a phone call saying girls about to be cut at Kabancha village. They're currently sheltering in the Baptist church, for example, and often this is at night. There's no road signs, there's no street maps, so using an app like this can be life-saving. So in 2017, we had a grant of $9,000 from USAID, which allowed us to set up a network of 87 digital champions in 87 villages across Serengeti district, and train them in person and via WhatsApp groups over the next year. That project funding finished in 2019, but we're carrying it on because it's working so well. So the first part of the training involved a Women and Children's Protection Committee that had been set up in each village, but really it only existed on paper. They'd never met, they'd never had any training because there'd never been any money for that. So we had sessions with that committee around what is gender-based violence, what their responsibilities were, etc., but also about using a smartphone, mapping, and using a free app that we're using called Open Data Kit, or ODK, which they're using to report gender-based violence. So then the committees selected one woman who'd never used a smartphone before, and she was a long-term loan, a smartphone to carry on this project and to become a digital champion for her community. So here you can see the first one of the first training sessions where people are looking at a map of their village on the smartphone. And we also printed out paper maps of the village. So here people have seen that for the first time, and also adding any information that is missing around on that map so that we can go back and add that. So as I said, digital champions were selected, and they had they were provided with a phone. It had a micro SD card, memory card, with a lot of downloaded material because connectivity is an issue, and data costs are an issue. So that had a lot of mostly Swahili videos and so on. And they were also joined together in a WhatsApp group for further training. So I mentioned that they were set up with an app called Open Data Kit, ODK. This is if people are working in low resource situations, i.e. with no money, it's really brilliant. It's extremely easy to set up. You can do it in multiple languages. It works offline. You can set it up via a web form on a computer and then deploy it to the phone and update it and so on. So we're using it for a lot of things, and people really, really like it. So there was ongoing training using WhatsApp, as I mentioned, and then with some ongoing training in groups as and when we got funding for that, because this is a volunteer-run project with virtually no budget. Most recently, we've started doing some training using an app called Plant Village Nuru. So this is an app that was developed by Penn State University, and it uses AI to detect pests in maize and cassava. Generally, all of the communities that we're working with are subsistence farmers, so the types of pests that you get in maize and cassava can significantly decrease the crop yield, and so significantly decrease families' income, leave them vulnerable for hunger, malnutrition, etc. So this is a really fantastic app. So Ending FGM has got many components as well as the digital champions. So the digital champions are doing follow-up work in the villages, telling people about the dangers of FGM, making sure that the girls at risk are being monitored, etc. But Hope is doing lots of other work, such as other community work, roadshows, and re-educating cutters. Here is a cutter, Christina. She got all of her income from subjecting girls to FGM because it's a paid-for service. But after Roby's efforts, she decided that this was not something that she wanted to do any longer. She had a huge amount of problems from the village because there is some status to being an FGM cutter. Her husband disowned her, but now she's an anti-FGM activist working together with Roby. So that was a really, really good turning point. So the Digital Champions, it's that network of 87 villagers, women, is ongoing. Currently, they're working with Nottingham University on researching risk factors for FGM and how that varies between villages. And there's more information on both the Crowd2Map and the Hope website if people are interested. One of the factors around risk is around the different clans. So in Tanzania, FGM is an issue. It's a cultural practice. So certain tribes do it. So in this area, they are the Kuria tribe, and that tribe is subdivided into very different clans, and the clans have different attitudes towards FGM. Some of them have turned against it, some of them haven't yet, and they also plan their cutting seasons at different times. So having this map of where the different clans are most prevalent is really useful for planning outreach work and FGM prevention work. So we're working towards many of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly around gender equality, but also many of the others, such as clean water, which is a huge issue. So for Open Data Day, we had a small $500 grant from Open Knowledge Foundation and did some work around that's what people perceive to be the main challenges towards reaching the SDGs. As you can, we also surveyed access to water in all of the villages. And as you can see, access to water is a huge issue. This is where people are getting their water from. So if there are pumps, as you can see here and here, often they're broken, and here. And so this is where people are ended up getting drinking water from. So it's a huge issue. And with climate change, then people also access to water is changing. People who are getting water from streams, then the waterfall is becoming more unpredictable, and we're trying to measure that as well. Another thing that we looked at with the digital champions is access to healthcare. So generally the healthcare is via very small pharmacies or duka which are these type of shops, but sometimes in some villages even these don't exist. So we believe the SDGs are best implemented and achieved when they're implemented village by village, region by region, etc. So this is what we're trying to do at a village level in Tanzania. So for Open Data Day, they had a session where the SDGs were introduced. For many people, they didn't know very much about the SDGs at all. So that was they found that interesting, and they were asked about which they felt were most relevant and most at need of achieving in their communities. So the general agreement was access to healthcare was a huge issue, to clean water, as you might expect, but also that the roads are very poor. Generally, they're dirt roads, and during the rainy season, they can become completely impassable. And as most people are farmers, having access to the markets to sell their crops and also for many other things, is extremely important. So those were the three main priorities that they felt. So I mentioned Open Data Kit. So it has a web form. We're using Kobo Toolbox, which is, you can get a free account as a non-profit, and then you can set up your survey. So you can either do it as a web form, or you can load it as an from Excel. So you can have different types of questions, drop-down lists, free text, but you can also have GPS points, photographs, videos, audio, etc. So what we're going to do next with this project is we're looking at one particular village as a reference point, and we're going to sample the village every 6 months to track progress towards the SDGs and see how people's perceptions have changed, what has been achieved, what still needs to be achieved, and so on. So that's the idea. If there's any researchers here who are interested in getting involved in a advisory capacity, that would be amazing. But otherwise, that's a quick overview of what we've been doing in this project. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and see if there's any questions. So if there are any, please put them in the chat. And if not, we'll go on to the second section, which is practical introduction to mapping. Okay, so thank you, Daisy. Yes, so we're also part of Crowd2Map is part of Missing Maps, which is a partnership between many organizations that feel the need for maps in their work. So MSF, Doctors Without Borders, International Red Cross are two of the main ones. And if anyone is more interested in mapping, then London Missing Maps have sessions on the first Tuesday of every month. I can share the links, and obviously these at the moment they're online, so people can join from anywhere. Okay, so I can't see any questions. Oh, great. You're very welcome, Alexander. So I put my email on the last slide, but I'll just type it in here as well. So, so as I said, we're using OpenStreetMap, and I'm going to just run through for the remainder of the session. Thank you, Slim. Then I'm going to show you a little bit about how to get started, and the idea is that then people can have a go at mapping, where either for one of our projects, which would be great, or anywhere that you're interested in mapping yourself, for example, Malawi. And if you are interested and you work in a particular area, then there's a very strong OpenStreetMap community across the world, but I'm particularly well connected to people in Africa. So, for example, there's an OpenStreetMap community in Malawi. The other group that we particularly work with is youth mappers. So if anyone's working with universities, youth mappers are student-run mapping groups. It's very easy to get set up. And they're a really great organization to work with. Okay, so then in which case I'm going to go to the second part, and if people want to get started as I go through, then that's great. I'll also post the link to this. So basically, OpenStreetMap, it's open data, so anybody can use it. You're supposed to credit OpenStreetMap. It's used by many, many big organizations now. So very often, particularly if you're looking at rural areas, rural Africa, the base map will be OpenStreetMap. Even organizations like Facebook and Microsoft are often using OpenStreetMap as their base layer for many different areas, because Google Maps is really poor in many places because it's not cost effective for them to map. So OpenStreetMap, so if you get started, you go to this login, and then you can search for wherever you want to look. So probably a good starting point is to just go to the search bar and to look, search for a place that you know well, and see how good the mapping is there and how much it could be improved. So, as I mentioned, it's relies on people's local knowledge, it's community driven, it works in a similar way to Wikipedia because there's a big community of mappers. People have different reasons why they work in OpenStreetMap or contribute. So it could be because they're interested in hiking trails or railway stations, some really esoteric things, or because they have projects in a particular area that is currently poorly mapped. This is quite old now. I think there's over 7 million users across the world now. It's growing all the time. And just recently, there was the 100 millionth edit. So it's like a Wikipedia for maps, and it can be used for anything. We're using it mostly for humanitarian purposes, as are people like MSF, Red Cross, and so on. So particularly after there's a disaster and they need to get information quickly. But it's also useful for planning, for example, where should a new school go? Where should a new water point go? And also for communicating issues and problems, so that you can highlight exactly where something is, but also for businesses, so that you can tell people exactly where you are. So there was a lot of mapping after the Haiti earthquake, and also after the earthquake in Nepal, but mapping is needed quickly in many crisis situations. So because there was a lot of mapping had to be done quickly after events like that, people started to say, well, we shouldn't be waiting for disasters to happen before we map places. Surely it's better to have maps in place beforehand, so that we can easily respond to disasters, but also for all the other things that I mentioned about planning health campaigns, reaching girls at risk, etc. So this is the practical bit. So if you haven't already got an OpenStreetMap account, then if you go to this site, openstreetmap.org or osm.org, and then you need to create an account. And then you will need to go to your email address and click on the confirmation. I'm going to carry on going through this, and then if people have got questions, I can always go back. So we have a Slack channel, which I'll post the link to in a moment. This is really useful because it has a lot of instructions for getting started. It has some quizzes and some badges, but also we have experienced mappers on here that can give feedback on your mapping. So this is really great. Here's an example of a quiz that you will get to if you access the Slack channel. And here are some examples of the badges that we've got. So we start off with learning how to map buildings. So we're using a site on the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Tasking Manager. So we have a number of different projects on there. So the colors mean, so for example, this one here, I'll go to this one actually. This is the one we're going to look at. So this gray bit here means this is all the bit that still needs to be mapped. And then the dark gray bit is the percentage that has been mapped and validated. It's a two-step process. So if we're using the tasking manager, so somebody will add, for example, the buildings, and then somebody else more experienced will check it and mark it as validated. So these are the these are the links. So osm.org is the link to sign up for an OpenStreetMap account. The Slack link is here, so it's C2M, i.e. crowd to map, data for good. So C2M D4G. And then this is the project that we're going to look at. And this is my email again. So I'm going to stop for a moment and see how people are getting on. Okay, so thank you, Zoe. So for the online mapping, then it would be a remote mapper that validates, and what they would do in this case would be just to check that the buildings that appear on the satellite images have been added, and and they've been added correctly. So one thing that's very important is to square the buildings and so on, and then and tag them correctly as buildings. But in terms of we also use the local volunteers are very important for saying, this is the correct name of the village, this is the correct name of this building. So that the digital champions and other community mappers, so we're working with probably around 1,000 different people around rural Tanzania, so they're adding their local knowledge as well. So they're either adding it directly into OpenStreetMap or they're using maps.me. So are there any other questions? You're welcome, Zoe. So if people have managed to set up their OpenStreetMap username, then perhaps they can type it into the chat, and And if people are able to join the Slack, I will put these links in the chat as well. And then if you'd like any more information about the digital champions, so there is more on the Crowd2Map site, and there's also more on the Hope. And I'll put those links in as well. And I'd be interested to know if people have used OpenStreetMap or ODK before. If they have, what they've used it for, where they're planning on mapping, if you're planning on mapping. All right, so the site is Crowd2Map. So do post your OpenStreetMap username in if you want to, if you've managed to create one. And this is my one. Welcome, Eilish. You just joined the Slack. That's great. Oh, well done. Great. Well done, Zoe. Thank you. So you can, on OpenStreetMap, you can also friend somebody so that you can see their edits, and if they friend you back, they can see yours. Well done, Alexander. So has anybody, have people heard of OpenStreetMap before this? Oh, that's really interesting, Alexander. Which my first job was actually in Sudan, so that's really interesting. I'd be interested to know what organization it was. So, yeah, QGIS is free software to create maps. So, printed maps. So the one that I showed of showing the clans is done in QGIS. Many people use ArcGIS from Esri, but the issue with that is it's very expensive. So many grassroots organizations can't afford that. So QGIS is a free open source alternative that's worth looking at. Yes, it's quite easy to contribute on Google Maps, but then all of that data is owned by Google. And they can do what they want with it. So I know that many people have been cut short because they use Google Maps on their website, and then Google changed the way that they charged for it, and then so they couldn't use it anymore. So if you're contributing to Google Maps, you're basically working for Google for free. And whereas OpenStreetMap is it's an open source community where the data is owned by everybody. So that's where we're going. And also, Google Maps doesn't work very well offline in many places. I mean, it's great if for central London, but for rural Tanzania, not so good. So is anybody, apart from Daisy, is anybody else working in Africa? Can they see any use for either OpenStreetMap or Kobo and Open Data Kit? Okay. I'm sure there is a lot to do in Namibia, and I think it would be useful for partners in Malawi. So if you, I'm very happy to help them and where I can, and also to try and connect them with other people that might be able to. So if also what I would really advise if you want to do mapping in Malawi or Namibia, a really good first step is to set up some youth mapper groups. So as I mentioned, they're student-run mapping clubs. It's pretty easy to set one up, and then there's a whole network. There's opportunities for partnerships, internships, etc. So we've set up we've set up quite a few youth mapper groups in Tanzania. Great, thanks, Daisy. Okay, I don't know what RARES. I guess that's an institute in Malawi. Well, Digital Champions is a scheme that we just set up, but I'm sure other people have set up similar ones. In fact, we wanted to have a nice Swahili name, but then we never quite came up with anything, so the Digital Champions just stuck. So it's a model like Train the Trainer, because we were always have no money. It was just a cost-effective way to try and disseminate training. So each village had one woman with one $30 smartphone, and then the idea was that she would be trained and she would disseminate her new knowledge within the community. I think if we had had more money, we would have trained had more than one woman per village. But I think it's a model that can work really well, and I think it's very cost effective. So if you're working in particularly if you're working in rural areas, I think it's a good model. And it would be interesting to hear more about what you're doing in Malawi. And is anybody using Kobo Toolbox or Open Data Kit for data collection? Again, there's a huge network of a huge community of people using this free tool. Oh, Football for Development sounds great. In fact, one of our local representatives in Tanzania works for a similar organization in southern Tanzania, so might be worth trying to connect them. So if anyone new joined, I'm just putting my email address in. So if anybody wants more information, then please do get in touch. I mentioned the Missing Maps events. The London ones don't appear to be on here right at the moment. I mean, but they're virtual, so you can obviously you can go to any. But the London team are pretty friendly, so I would recommend them. The next one will be the first Tuesday of June. So what's that? Oh, the first. There's usually some pretty interesting people there from various different organizations. So how are people getting on? Are people managing to do any mapping? Any mapping questions? I can see a few of you have joined the Slack, which is brilliant. Great, thanks, Slim. Great that you're part of this. So what events have people particularly enjoyed today? Thanks. Yes, I went to the data visualization one. That was really, I really enjoyed that one. Okay, I missed the urban health. And what are people looking forward to tomorrow? I'm looking forward to the how to use geospatial data and how to do impact reporting for small organizations. Oh, I'll see you there tomorrow then, Zoe. I think impact reporting is difficult for small organizations with no budget, really, but yeah, we'll see what they come up with. So how much do people use geospatial currently? So one of the things that's quite nice with Kobo Toolbox, it can automatically generate maps for you and so on. We've done sessions where set up forms where people record, for example, the location of water points or clinics or so on, and it can automatically generate a map, which is good. Yep. Great. How do you use it, Alexander, in your reporting? Oh, very. And you sound like you're an expert then. Do you have a link to any? No, no worries. Okay, well, I think we're almost out of time. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you found some of it useful. And if you do have any questions, please do contact me. And if you'd like to get involved in any way in this project, that would be fantastic. We're always looking for more volunteers. And enjoy the rest of the conference. And sounds like I'll see some of you at the sessions tomorrow. So thank you.